Welcome to KYNDversations, a space for sacred dialogue, honest reflection, and deep listening. I'm your host, KYNDversation. KYNDversations was born from my own inner dialogue, my journey of spirituality through life's unfoldings, questions, and becoming. Along the way, I discovered something essential, that transformation often happens not in isolation, but in conversation. In this podcast, I sit with people from diverse faith traditions, spiritual paths, and lived experiences to explore one central question. What does devotion mean to you? And how does your relationship to the sacred shape your life? My hope is that each conversation becomes a light post for those who feel challenged, disconnected, or searching for belonging. And that through our shared reflection, you might find courage, clarity, and deeper connection to yourself. Wherever you are on your journey, you are welcome here. Welcome to KYNDversations. I am your host, Kendra, and I am delighted to have our next guest for KYNDversations. Theodor, also known as Christian Forde-Stiegler, is a doctoral candidate in organization, development, and change at Bowling Green State University, where he also serves as Associate Director of Graduate Recruitment and Operations. He is a multidisciplinary practitioner whose work lives at the intersection of collaboration, creativity, and transformation, driven by a mission to co-create synergistic environments that foster innovation and collective flourishing. Theo integrates collaborative improvisation, virtual engagement, collaborative arts, and music therapy into his work with individuals, organizations, and communities. As a musician at Collingwood Presbyterian Church and with Sankofa Sounds, he brings an embodied understanding of collaboration as both practice and philosophy, where listening, presence, and shared creation open new possibilities for change. Shaped in part by his experience growing up as a pastor's kid in East Germany and his work with World Vision International, Theo offers a globally informed and spiritually grounded perspective on identity, belonging, and transformation. His work ultimately invites us into a more whole world, one where we are truly better together. Let's welcome Theo.
That felt good.
Good.
I'm gonna have to put that somewhere as just that bit, like if I have a rough day, I'm like, let me hear how Kendra was talking about me there again. Thank you for that.
You should, Theo. Thank you for your yes of being here. How are you arriving today?
I'm arriving with the gift that I have received from a coach that I'm currently working with, who's actually a graduate of the doctoral program that you and I are both a part of. And Dr. Merkel and I got to an understanding that sometimes when I have those moments, it feels like the weight of the world is in a big sack of potatoes that's sitting on my chest, that I have the power and the gift and the right talents to take that sack of potatoes and put it in the corner. I can't make it disappear, but I certainly don't have to keep it right here on my chest. And so with everything that's going on in our world, I'm grateful to arrive with you in just a moment of exploration and curious as to what our conversation is going to bring.
This conversation is definitely going to be improvisational in nature because you have no idea what I'm going to ask you. So
that's the beauty of conversation, right?
Absolutely. Theo, before you came on, I sent you this invitation to be on the podcast, and your first question was why? And I remember being at the bar with you and multiple cohorts after one of our long days of being in class, and we sparked up this conversation about you growing up in Germany and being a pastor's kid, and I had no idea you were a pastor's kid. So I was just like, I love the work Theo does, and I'm wondering how being a pastor's kid and his journey of spirituality has informed how he shows up today. So I'm curious, as a pastor's kid growing up in Germany, what was that experience like for you?
Whew, that's a big one for me. So I was born in East Berlin, and as a pastor's son, East Germany, there were some very clear restrictions, very clear parameters that were sort of established and assumed as to what that meant for me growing up. My dad is a minister in the somewhat smaller in size German Baptist church. We are, theologically speaking, probably less restrictive than most people in the US when they think Baptist. I think a lot of people think Southern Baptist. And when I first came to the States from Germany and people found out, oh, you're a Baptist minister's kid. Wait a minute. I've seen you drink. I've seen you had a smoke. I've seen you dance, play cards. What's going on? What kind of Baptist are you? That is not this is not a judgment statement on any kind of convictions that anyone from a certain denomination or another might carry, but my experience was not as restrictive in those contexts. But it was very clear that growing up under a socialist regime, that, for example, my ambitions to go to university would be limited to church music and or theology. There was not going to be an opportunity for me to study medicine or become a lawyer or want to explore other fields of what the government in East Germany would have considered educating a socialist leader, which my value set was not in alignment with. What that meant growing up was that I oftentimes prided myself in being the one that's different, being like, I'm not part of your club. I am proud to be different, and here is why, to sort of deal with what sometimes felt like isolation, what sometimes felt like, yeah, I'm just sort of the odd one out. I think my family, my parents did a really good job in allowing me to lean into not seeing that just as a negative or a loss, but seeing that as you're pretty unique in the way that you're able to live in these environments, and why not lean into that? Had to be cautious with how far I leaned into that, because you didn't want to be on the radar of that system in terms of the one that's always intentionally looking to stick out.
I really value at a young age you being able to embrace the uniqueness of who you are, which so many people at a young age aren't. And I love that I'm ordained Alliance of Baptist, which is a strand of Baptist that is a bit more theologically liberal and diverse. And I'm wondering for you, Theo, given the Baptist context that you grew up in, and this invitation that you had for your parents to be exactly who you are, what was your understanding of God and community at that time?
So there is different versions of, I'm thinking back to that 13, 14, 16-year-old Theo, and you will find possibly that my English is going to start sounding wonky because that's data that's stored in here in German, right? Rather than in English, and sometimes those translations don't quite come out the way I intend them to. But there were some competing, if you will, understandings of God connected to how I understood my faith. And there was sort of the teachings that had left enough of an impact of, the guy up there with the fly swatter, that's not what you were supposed to do. And it wasn't a 2x4, it was just a fly swatter, right? It wasn't I wasn't going to get injured in the process, but I was going to maybe feel this sting of, And then I think that competed in my realities with the lived experience of people that told me that part of their loving me was inspired by their faith. Folks like my mom's mother, my grandma Anita, who was one of the most amazing humans I've ever been privileged to share time and space with, where it was very clear that their understanding of loving me inspired by their God was not the guy with the fly swatter. So I think in a bigger picture, the longer I've grown, thankfully, this idea of God being sort of the singular, describable, oh, here is how I see God, has made space for a sense of being in a presence of peace, being in the presence of goodwill, being in the presence of inspiring one another with care that is a representation of how I see God or understand God.
I love
Or
how you.
feel God. Maybe that's where I'm sort of landing more times than not. Like, how do I see God? A visual thing? Like, I don't know. I don't. But I certainly have been in places and in spaces and with people where the presence that I felt to me was that divine presence.
I really appreciate your conception, your shift from moving from conceptualizing God to feeling God, and what that experience is for you. And it makes me think about your gifts of being a musician, because music is such a tool that leads us into our feelings oftentimes, where it becomes like I'm trying to think of the theorist that I'm thinking of right now, but it's slipping my mind. When you think about objects that people go to for comfort, music is one of those things that allows you to suspend whatever you might be feeling in the
Yeah.
moment and go somewhere else. How does your spirituality inform how you engage music, or how does your music engage your spirituality?
It's one expression of it. Um, I think a lot of the music that has been most meaningful has come out of collaborative moments, arguably mistakes even. I often tell the story about one of my favorite arrangements that we continue to play. We'll play it on Easter Sunday. Again, it's actually a reimagining of a song by Jonathan McReynolds. And our arrangement is quite a departure from the recordings that I'm aware of his song called Limp. And part of what makes our arrangement is unique is that the harmonic structuring we've done is inspired by mistakes that happened in practice. The bass player played a note like, "Oh, I'm sorry." I'm like, "No, play that note again. That's cool. You played an F sharp over this? Let's keep that. That is
Gotcha.
cool. That is right." And
Gotcha.
so um I happen to think of those things as the little sparks from the divine. Sometimes they're lightning bolts and they sit you on your butt. Sometimes they're just like these little nudges that like, um you were going to call that a mistake? Really? No, that was beautiful inspiration. And so I think being open to that is part of how I want to live my spiritual life, right? Whether that's in making music or whether that's in uh, walking on a river with my dearest holding hands, and on the other side of the riverbank, a deer hopping out into the water and just going, "Thank you," you know. Um, so I think I'm hoping in my music to express you made a statement earlier about music is one of those ways to get into the things that we feel. I think I would want to go as far as, if music doesn't do that, I'm not very interested in that
Mm-hmm.
music.
Mm-hmm.
It could be something that Bach wrote a long, long time ago. It could be something that a bunch of 13-year-olds are working on, reimagining some punk song that inspired them. I think all of those things can be an expression of our emotional realities that to me have become connected to my spiritual reality. I don't think I can separate the two.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. I was thinking about Winnicott's transitional object theory, and how music is one of those transitional objects that can, like you said, shift you. And I really appreciate you naming how the accidents in music, the chords, the notes that we hit can turn into something good, can turn into something really beautiful. And this, I really appreciate, Theo, the openness to life that you're walking in by being open to what comes up and using what comes up. So with the work that you're doing, and I'm going to be bouncing all around because I love the work that you're doing when it comes to collaborative improvisation and how you're integrating all of your gifts and interests from music to art therapy, collaborative arts. Talk to me about how this came about. How were you led
Mm.
into this?
I certainly didn't plan it. Certainly didn't sit down with a piece of paper and said, even prayerfully, God, what's next for me? Oh yeah, here's this thing I ought to explore. It's been many nudges and many little nuanced conversations that ended me at a place where, or actually not ended, that started me at a place where I showed up in the early 2000s at Bowling Green State University looking for my next step in education, which I wanted to get a master's. I actually started as an interdisciplinary master's student pursuing both a degree in jazz studies and playing jazz bass and in organization development and change. BGSU is one of the cool places that has those interdisciplinary offerings that students can sort of customize to some extent. So that's what I was initially pursuing. And through that process, needed to identify what faculty members would support this kind of interdisciplinary approach, which pretty quickly landed me in conversations with Dr. Steve Cady,
Mm-hmm.
who was the originator, if you will, of the doctoral program that we are both part of. And through conversations with him, came across, for example, approaches like Drum Cafe from South Africa, which was an effort about at the same time as Nelson Mandela was released from prison, to how do we tangibly connect the separated and diverse groups in South Africa into experiences that make sense regardless of where we're from and what we believe or what we feel strongly about. And Drum Cafe is one example of a collaborative arts interaction or intervention, if you will, that basically puts people drum in hand together as a group experiencing synergy.
Mm-hmm.
This is my cliff notes of the cliff notes of the experience. And I pretty quickly, that's one of multiple examples of those kinds of practices, I became, I think addicted is not an entirely inappropriate term to use, to that sense of shared synergistic experience.
Mm-hmm.
The kind of thing that you and I get to do right now, having a conversation where I find myself saying and thinking and remembering and feeling things that wouldn't ever have come up for me without your inputs and your nudges and this platform and this offer for this conversation. What does that look like when there's 30 of us? How do we engage in a way that we can walk away with a felt experience, not just a rationalized one,
Mm-hmm.
of having a conversation together that was an unique in that moment experience for exactly those 30 of us. Open space is another approach to collaboration. It has some rules, and one of them is that the right people are the ones that show up, and what happens is exactly what needed to and was supposed to. And so having that openness in my artistic and professional endeavors, and personally having with that a trust or a faith or a belief that there is a divine power that is greater than what I can understand, that helps guide some of those interactions, is one of the places that has gotten me to this place now where I'm looking for the intersections of what is the opportunity to create containers, we sometimes say, for container safety for people in a room, the right structures, the right context, the right environment for people to be able to be creative, to be vulnerable, to be genuine, to be in the moment, able to show up and create something that, by definition, if I use that word synergy, is bigger than the sum of its part, is bigger than the inputs of Theo and KYNDra. Doesn't just mean Theo and KYNDra. It's like inspired by some of the peers in our cohorts that, you know, we had a little conversation with, that offered an insight, that asked a question that got me to, I'm like, I never thought about it from over there where you're standing right now. So the opportunity through my educational journey to be able to explore the music and the field of ODNC, and to look for those intersections, and at the same time being in professional environments that allowed me to lean into music therapy. For example, I was when I started my master's, I was a manager for a unit or a group of individuals with developmental disabilities, and it was so clear that everything that was going to ultimately make a difference for those individuals had to be expressed in the relationships of the people caring for those individuals. So what are the right frames? What are the right contexts? What are the right rules and guidance to establish, to say, here's how you should interact with Johnny, because this is Johnny's story, here's Johnny's trauma. And it's maybe different from Janelle over here, who has a very different story. And sort of taking that further and thinking about those frameworks or those structures. Again, container is a word that comes to mind for me, to be able to be in the moment with people and be creative with people, to create something that only that group of people could have created, and that hopefully has an impact beyond in whatever organization or clientele or stakeholders that we're looking to serve in whatever that specific context is.
Thank you for the work that you do and how it integrates both head and heart, Theo. I am thinking about my own work when it comes to my interests have shifted quite a bit since I first started, but I'm really interested in ritual technology rooted in a sacred context that forms organizational coherence after trauma, after an organization has experienced trauma. And ritual is collaborative. And can somewhat be improvisational if you're open to letting the spirit guide you and seeing what comes forth. I wonder, for you, what has collaborative improvisation taught you just about life and humans?
I think a conviction that I carry is that we already do it all the time. Like you and I are doing it right now, right? There's a reason that if you look at the literature on improvisation, conversation comes up as an example or a metaphor for what is this thing, this improvisation. We are interacting and reacting to one another. There is part of my waving my hands and all this body language stuff that maybe sometimes is excessive for some people, but that's part of the conversation. Whether or not you're nodding right now is going to probably have me say different things that if you were just like sitting there with a wrinkled forehead, like, what the heck is he talking about? That would be my interpretation of that, which I don't know if that's factually true, but that would be some of the parts and pieces that go into the collaborative improvisation between the two of us that is this conversation. I'm particularly intrigued by what does that look like in bigger groups. 3 to 7 is sort of where I'm really intrigued what that looks like, because I want to better understand whether or not what happens in a jazz combo, a
Mm-hmm.
flamenco ensemble, um, how is that the same, or is it the same? How is it different from what happens when a group of firefighters are out there saving lives, when a team of nurses is addressing bedside care
Mm-hmm.
concerns, when personal protection agents are looking to make sure that the person in their charge remains safe, given a ever-changing environment that they're maneuvering and facilitating. All those to me are examples of collaborative improvisation. And what believe I've learned so far is that there are structures, and in our specific conversations, I'm wondering rituals, questions that provide a context
Mm-hmm.
for how that interaction that I'm calling improvisational can happen. Firefighters have very specific A happens, then B happens, then C happens. But if C can't happen, C2 happens. And if
Mm-hmm.
C2 has to be adjusted because B happened this way, right? So at what point does the planning, the structure, the ritual become the guide stone? Not sure if that's the perfect metaphor. The container for doing the right thing that we need to do right now to save this
Mm-hmm.
life, care for this patient, score the next bucket in basketball, whatever those contexts might be. So I want to better understand um, whether or not my assumptions, my leanings around, I believe that some of those, I have a colleague, I feel privileged to call him that, a gentleman who does research, who's in Austria, Lukas Zenk, who has looked at improvisation across different domains. He and his co-authors are sort of the first ones that I've found that really are looking at improvisation in the arts, in theater, in business and organizations, um, so across those different domains. And what Lucas will say is that improvisation is a core way of human interaction.
Mm-hmm.
And so I believe that that shows up in a music ensemble and in a nursing team. Those happen to be two that I know a little bit about one, and I really want to understand specifically nursing teams. That's what my dissertation focus is. How does improvisation show up in those nursing teams? And then I will want to share what I found. Are there parallels that show that it's basically the same thing going on?
Mm-hmm.
Or here's a similar thing that's going on, and here's how it's different and unique in those two contexts and arenas and domains.
Mm-hmm.
What I've learned is that those structures exist. The conversations that I've had with nurses, um, the conversations that I have with musicians, there are things around, for example, the different roles that people fill that allow them to show up in the improvisational moment. There are things around agreement as to how do we progress through this time. What has to happen over the next 5 minutes?
Mm-hmm.
We have some shared understanding of, have some shared structure for, but within what we actually then do to get from A to B in those 5 minutes is where the improvisation happens.
Mm. Oh, that's strong, Theo. I'm curious when it comes to the work that you're doing, do you consider it at all healing work or transformational work?
I hope that it can be that.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that it always, that
Exactly.
almost feels like sort of the higher purpose, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I don't know that I feel some imposter syndrome around, like, here's a 10-minute interaction that I was part of creating. Was there potential for healing in this? I hope so, but the intention hopefully is that multiples of those interactions over time with, maybe the same group of people could have um, an impact that goes beyond just achieving identifiable, measurable outcomes, but have some deeper meaning, we started our conversation around sort of the feeling part versus the rationalizing part. I hope that people walk away from interactions that I helped co-create feeling more at peace, feeling empowered, feeling heard and seen. I think if I can do that, then some of the measurable outcomes that are probably important to want to earn a livelihood with the work that I intend to do, but hopefully those are a welcome byproduct to sort of the bigger experience of shared synergy that feeds people's soul rather than just their pocketbook.
I like that. When it comes to the work that you're doing, what is coming up in terms of the inhibitors, if there is a such thing to improvisation, whether it be difference or tension or conflict? Does that show up at all in the literature?
So there's one specific thank you for that segue. There's one specific study that comes to mind, that a gentleman named Charles Limb and his team did. They've actually done a number of these studies, but the initial one was taking jazz musicians, putting them in an fMRI scanner, and looking at what happens in the brain when they are playing a rehearsed piece versus an improvised piece. And the scanning data, so you can basically look at activity in the brain and say which parts of the brain light up, and we know a lot of things now, amazingly, about the kinds of things that happen in our brain. And what they found is that when those individuals were improvising, the parts of our brain that are responsible for, I'm going to call it self-monitoring, right? Did I put on deodorant? Is my fly where it's supposed to be? Am I saying this wrong? Oh my goodness, can these people tell I have a really heavy German accent? Like all of those self-checks. Is my hair looking okay? All of those things for those professional improvisers seem to be turned maybe not off, but way down. And the parts of the brain that do language and communication and interaction were lit up. As compared to the rehearsed piece, a lot of that self-monitoring was very active. Because this is my interpretation of the data, because you're checking on, like, am I playing this right? Whereas in the improvisational moment, it was more vulnerable. It was more, I'm not just constantly checking for mistakes, because to my, some of my favorite music examples mentioned earlier, some of the coolest musical moments that I've been part of were what may be classified as a mistake in the originally established format or structure or score, but they were actually way cooler when they happened in the moment and opened interactive, synergistic energy that wouldn't have been there otherwise. I have a personal theory that Bach, I grew up under his picture over my dad's piano, and it's still over my dad's piano. Baroque composer with a crazy output. I'm convinced that part of why he was able to write so much is because he leaned into sitting tired and writing something, and that's not what I meant to play, but I'm going to keep it. And going from that and using the structures and the tools that he had to say, here's how I can develop a theme. But if I suddenly throw that note in there that I didn't actually mean to play, now it offers a new opportunity for a new composition, a new creation. I want for that to be something that can happen in the kinds of, whether they're strategy conversations or whether they're, hey, we're onboarding a new service conversations, or whether they're conversations in, how can I best care for the graduate students that I'm looking to support, that I allow for those moments to open a new door for an opportunity that wasn't there if I hadn't made, or somebody else, that mistake that we were like, wait a minute, was that wrong or was that interesting? And if it was interesting, and don't get me wrong, there are things that is like, no, that was wrong. Let's not ever do that again. There are also those, but the opportunity to, just act and react in the moment, and that study would show that hopefully that means without all the self-monitoring going on, or at least it being less active, has real potential for new creative, innovative things to happen if we allow it.
Mm-hmm. This is just sitting with me in a particular way in terms of the suspension of self-monitoring when you allow yourself just to be, when you allow yourself to improv, and how you really have to get out of your own way and be open to making mistakes, because the mistakes are going to come, and sitting with the expectation that a chord might be wrong. I might even say the wrong thing, and at the same time we can co-create with these mistakes that are happening, if you want to call them mistakes, which I think is it adds to a remembrance of wholeness that we always have what we need. And I am also thinking about, in your bio, you talked about wanting to make a more whole world. And that has stuck with me. What does wholeness mean to you, Theo?
I think it's connected to the very thing that we're talking about. In one apparently measurable way of that I think of wholeness is, am I in a space right now with KYNDversation where I have to constantly self-monitor, or am I experiencing a way of being seen, being heard, being able to be in the moment that allows me to turn that down and just be present? I believe that most of us, when we talk about, I want to be seen, I want to be heard, I want to be recognized, that part of, or one version of, well, what does that look like, is I want to be able to be in a space and not have to self-monitor. I want to be present in this moment and not worry about being judged for my hair being out of place or something being on my teeth, or being perceived as the German pastor's kid, or whatever labels that are floating around in my head that I have concern that somebody might use to judge me, versus just like, or to judge me rather than meet me with curiosity, to like, who is this guy? What is he about? I want to understand more about where this individual is coming from. And then with that comes the challenge of making that available to the people that I speak to, that I interact with, right? To hopefully allow them that same sense of, oh, and when I'm hanging out with Theo, I don't have to constantly self-monitor. That's probably not the only way I think of wholeness, but it's one that came up in our conversation. I think another way to think of it for me is to be comfortable in disagreement. We don't have to agree to love each other. We don't have to agree to be courteous to one another. We don't have to agree to be able to be genuinely in an energetic, beautiful experience together. We can vote for different presidents and still stand at that river and look at that deer and go, wow. It doesn't have to be connected to these either or paradigms that we seem to be so good at in the Western world, of establishing, that it's either one or the other, and we do that with so many things. I would love to get us to a place where we can acknowledge that those things exist, and they don't mean that we can't be genuinely connected in a given moment or many moments over time.
I absolutely agree with you. What you said about wholeness definitely resonates with me, and I can say, Theo, just from interacting with you over these past, I guess it's been a couple of years now, that you've been consistent at me experiencing belonging with you.
Oh.
And I think that speaks to,
thank you.
Absolutely. And I think it speaks to just your presence. I've always experienced you as being present. And this idea that wholeness is about not judging the people that come on our paths or anyone else, where they can feel safe enough to be exactly who they are. Kind of reminds me of Richard Rohr's work, who is one of my favorite Catholic friars and mystics, when he has a book called Everything Belongs. And because everything belongs, we have to be able to make space when we disagree, because all the ideas that are verse, that are convergent, that come with tension at times, we are here in this soup of life all together. So how do we make space for each other? So I really appreciate that, Theo. Yeah.
And I think I can be a very judgmental person, but I hope that part of my personal and spiritual growth has been that I can recognize when I am that judgmental person, and I can check in with myself to go, does that make sense? You know, to put this person in this box. I often talk to my students about this idea of trauma-informed practice, is what I like to think of it. It comes from a work in healthcare where it's called trauma-informed care. But this idea that all of us have been, I think, I have been many a times in a situation where I, whether it's at a family function or at the bar, look across and go, what the is wrong with you, person? And that closes the door to any sort of interaction or conversation, because I just judged you to be crazy or whatever, compared to, man, I wonder what is going on for you. What has happened to you that this is how you're acting, reacting in this moment, which actually has at least the opportunity for a door opening just a little bit. I may not approach that person in that moment and say, hey, what happened to you? I wanted to, but maybe I can later. Maybe I have an option now to, hey, you had a really strong reaction to when this happened. I want to understand where that came from. Hopefully that allows somebody that I care about to get to a place where they can turn their self-monitoring down just a little bit with me.
No, that's good. I'm glad you mentioned trauma-informed care, because it's a lot of the work that I was doing before I got into the doctoral program, and still doing, and doing it more as it relates to creating sacred systems through a trauma-informed care, where we can hold our polarities and manage them in ways where it's neither either or, but both and. I'm kind of a both and. Well, I am a both and type of person. And making room for complexities is hard. I think it's hard for all humans, but I'll speak for myself. It's difficult. And there's intentional work that you have to do in order to be able to check in with yourself when you notice that you're judging, or when you notice that how you're holding someone prevents connection, or expands disconnection. So I'm wondering for you, Theo, I have two questions, but I'm going to start with the first one. What devotional practices or spiritual practices, or practices in general, do you have to be able to practice healthy internal boundaries?
I'm going to start with the thought that came up before you asked that question, which is that I think the attraction to either or that we have as humans is because it's simple.
Yes.
If I can categorize something that I'm dealing with into there's this one or that one, and I tell myself I can just pick one, then that's easy. Like, I am now X. Both and is a lot more challenging to rationally wrap my head around, but to then, like, what does that mean for how I want to live it? So that, I think, is the connection into devotional practice. I thought quite a bit about when you first offered this opportunity to have this conversation, that word was prominent in how you shared the opportunity with me. And so I'm like, what are the things that Devotion. What are the things that I'm devoted to? And I think that in a way tracks back to hopefully my intent, not hopefully, my intention to live my faith by the way that I show up for others.
Mm.
I am devoted to my spouse.
Mhm.
I am devoted to the 4 young people that we share responsibility for. I am devoted to the students that hopefully benefit from my commitment to their learning in our program. I'm devoted to showing up with my worship band on Sunday mornings and to the folks that play in it to create something that can be that expression in the moment of gratitude and worship. Not just on Sunday mornings, but that happens to be when we're making most of our music.
Yeah.
I find myself less and less thinking about devotion in the context of things that aren't tangibly connected to interaction, that aren't tangibly connected to an individual outside of myself or a group of people.
Mhm.
And I hope that that's how I can show people what my spiritual foundation is. I used to
Mhm.
I used to be I used to be in my mid-teens the guy that would run around and knock on people's door and wanted to prove that I know more Bible verses than you do, and I know the ones that trump yours.
Mm.
And then I had a moment where I'm like, the only thing you just made sure of, Theo, is that that person never wants to step foot into the club that you claim that you're coming from, that you're trying to invite them to.
When did you have
You
this
did.
epiphany? Because it's such a great epiphany, Theo. Because so many people, I feel like we're all at different trajectories of our spiritual evolution and our theological and spiritual formations. At at what point did you say, "This is not it"? Trying to prove somebody wrong, trying to discount their theological beliefs or their understanding about God.
Yeah. It was sometime in the mid 90s, and we had moved, this is after the wall fell down, so you now had a former East German pastor's kid who felt empowered to say just exactly what was on his mind all the time.
Mm.
And so I would literally, with some of our youth group representatives, we would have certain, like, we'd go door to door. The intention was to invite people to church, but what it often turned into, not all the time, but if somebody's willing to engage in the conversation that maybe um, felt like, let's see what these young folks here are trying to proclaim, that maybe had knowledge of the Bible, that had maybe their own spiritual journey and would push back on some of the things that we were offering, I would try to, like, oh no, you're wrong because
Mm.
this scripture
Mhm.
says that and this scripture says that. And so it became an either or, right? It became, I'm right, that must mean that you're wrong.
Right.
There was no both ands. There was no, where I've landed now, some of the most with that same youth group. I think maybe that's part of what led to the, like, what are you doing, Theo? To
Mhm.
have 2 of us read the same scripture, and I don't care if it's the Quran or the Rig Veda or the Torah or the Bible, for 2 of us to read the same scripture, look up at each other and go, wow, that is so impactful in my life right now. And
Mhm.
then come to find out we're talking about two completely different things that we found in that same piece of scripture, right?
Yeah.
To
Yeah.
you, it said something about your relationship with your mom. To me, it said something about my sexuality. I don't know.
Mhm.
But it
Mhm.
was in that moment from that same bit of scripture. And again, this to me is not a Bible specific thing, I don't think.
Right. Right.
It could be a scientific article for all I care, right? But for both of us to look at the same information and have it
Mhm.
speak different truth into our moment was what part of what led me to, like, how am I telling this person that
Mhm.
they're wrong because of how they read the Bible, and I must be right because of how I read the Bible. I,
Yeah.
I became very disillusioned with this idea of denominational, because basically a lot of times when we have these conversations across denominations that aren't ecumenical, we're really in a way saying, well, now our reading, our theology is the right one and yours isn't.
Right.
I think that's garbage. Sorry.
Mm-hmm.
My relationship with the divine and your relationship with the divine, is there an opportunity for us to connect around it? And if so, what does it mean?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's what I'm interested in. And I have found
Mm-hmm.
that that can happen, yes, with fellow Christians, but that can happen with people that are of the Jewish faith, that can happen with somebody who's Muslim, that can happen with somebody who's a Buddhist, that can happen with somebody who says, I'm not sure about God. I think
Mm-hmm.
there is some bigger, higher power, but I don't know. Some of those conversations, some of those individuals have been the most impactful from my spiritual growth. They haven't just been pastors or theologians that have made a difference. And I think it goes back to, you spoke about this idea of polarities, right? That's
Mm-hmm.
difficult to wrestle with.
It is.
But I think it's a much more apt thinking about modeling, framing for our realities than this, like, Theo happens to be a middle-aged cisgender white guy, and Kyndra is different from that when you look at the screen and you look at the people. The reality is that it
You can
is
say
what,
I'm
like
middle-aged, Theo.
0.2% of the difference in our DNA, right?
Right.
And goodness, us humans are good at focusing in on that stuff that shows up on the outside. Yikes.
We are, and I'm so glad that you named the diversity that can be in one faith group, and all these other different faiths that have their own way of being and understanding about God, about the sacred. And this is why I'm such a big proponent of interfaith and interspiritual work, and wanted to have this type of platform to invite people into other ways of thinking and being that may not be in alignment with how they feel. I used to be someone who was really adamant about making sure that I was deconstructing people's theologies, because they weren't aligned with this liberative theology that I had, right? But then I had to take a step back and kind of reel myself in and say, this is not your task. Like, these folks are good believing how they believe. Now there's another way that I have to boundary myself when it comes to how certain theologies can be very harmful to people's way of being in life. I have limitations there, but ultimately, if this is what makes you feel good at night to believe X, Y, and Z about God or about whatever, who am I? Because this is your own experience of this matrix that we live in.
Mm-hmm.
We're all choosing what we're going to believe. Now, so Theo, do you have any specific practices that help you? Some people lean into meditation, some people lean into prayer, other people lean into contemplation.
I wish I was more ritualistic with some of my practices. I do breath work. I am a big fan of even just the simplest square breathing. Like if I feel that my blood pressure is going up and I'm anxious about something, I don't have to rely on the pharmaceutical assist that I have access to, but I can maybe just sit and close my eyes and, alternate between a 4-count breathing in to holding my breath to a 4-count breathing out, and doing that cycle a bunch of times. I am a prayerful individual, not as routinely as I would like to be. I find a lot of my spiritual energy in conversation. I try to be really intentional in making space to converse with my spouse, to be present with her, whether it's coming home from work or whether it's getting up in the morning, to make space that that allows the divine to show up and be part of our reality in that moment.
Mhm.
I have lots of greater potential and opportunity for that to be more intentional and more impactful and more uh, habitual. I love your framing that you've shared with me a couple of times, and like what is, what makes a habit a ritual is something I sometimes think about.
Mhm.
I think sometimes we have connotation. Sometimes I have connotations issues with ritual because it gets used in contexts that maybe aren't, oh, I want to stay away from that. But
Mhm.
if one definition that I maybe you have shared that I've seen somewhere, of ritual as a sacred habit, then I want more of those.
Mhm. Mhm.
I got some room to grow in that department.
I got you, and I really value you naming how intentional conversation can be a spiritual practice. I don't think I've ever considered that before, but you're right. There's something holy about a willingness to be present with someone, to be curious about someone, to be open to hearing from someone who may not always think like you, even if it's someone that you love. There is something I believe that's not only HOLY holy, but WHOLY
Hmm.
holy.
Yes.
That we get a chance to listen to each other in into remembrance of who we are and our wholeness. So thank you for that, Theo. When it comes to your spiritual journey, as there have been shifts in your professional journey in your career, what type of shifts have come with your spirituality over let's say over the past 5 years since you've been in the program?
So I have one come to mind that's a little further back than that I'll share, and
Okay.
maybe one more recent ones will come up too. I can tell you that growing up, meditation was something that was not an approved spiritual practice, right?
Mhm.
Meditation was the idea, or the way that I heard people talk about it is that, well, this idea of meditation in the East is sort of this emptying of yourself, and that's
Mhm.
the opposite of what we want to do as good Christian folk, to be filled by
Mhm.
the Spirit. So those two don't mix.
Mhm.
Um, when I was going through my divorce, meditation practice was a emotional spiritual lifesaver. To It felt like how I knew how to pray wasn't good enough. I've written songs about I didn't know how to pray anymore.
Mhm.
Um, there's some scripture that suggests you don't have to know how to pray. The Spirit will intercede on your behalf, and but I had moments where I was screaming at God, where that, like, this is just getting me stuck. I'm not. And so a therapist suggested learning about what meditative practice looked like. And I tend to be somebody who looks for, like, well, what's the tangible practice I can pursue? So I found the Headspace app that I don't know if you're
Mhm.
familiar with.
Yes.
A gentleman in Great Britain who is a I believe Tibetan monk by training,
Mhm.
came back to the UK and wanted to make his spiritual insights, this is my words, not his, accessible to people. And so, it was like the initial step was like 10 minutes per day. And you just use this app and you sit with it. And it became something that was sort of a lifeline for me. So one shift, from you don't meditate, that is not a prayerful thing, to really leaning into, and I believe experiencing God, experiencing the divine in that meditative practice,
Mhm.
and not experiencing as a sense of emptiness, but experiencing as a sense of being able to be in the moment
Mhm.
and allowing all the crazy thoughts. Is another song lyric, um, you know, to acknowledge that they're there, which sort of to me connects back to what we talked about polarities. This idea of even how we treat ourselves in terms of, oh, I have to push these bad thoughts away, instead of, hello thoughts, there you are again. What a familiar companion you have become. But
Yes.
here is what I am able to choose. Here is where I'm able to sit. Here is where I'm able to show up, in spite of all of these passengers on my emotional and psychological bus that I'm driving around. So that was one fairly significant shift. I think the other shift is really sort of more of a trajectory. If I used to be somebody that identified as, I am a German Baptist minister's oldest son, and here's all that comes with it, like having silly arguments over why that particular theology was superior to all other theology, to getting to a place that I really feel like it opened me up to, I'm really curious about the understand, or the realization that if Muslims claim one true God and I'm claiming one true God, had a friend, Muslima, who said, how could he not be the same guy? And I said, there's no way. Your Allah cannot be that. I gotta. This is my guy. You can't claim him. And for her to say, really, doesn't he have to be the same guy? I'm like,
Right.
that was sort of a kick in the pants. I'm like, you make more sense than I'm making. What do I do with that? Right.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I'm so curious about what I might learn from somebody else's spiritual practice. It doesn't mean I have to practice all of them or adapt all of them or understand all of them, but I also don't have to judge them anymore as being inferior to what I think I figured out.
I'm
And
with you.
that shift is ongoing. There's more to learn.
I'm on the same trajectory as you, Theo. I believe in oneness, and that we all enter into that oneness in a variety of ways, which I think is beautiful. So this is my last question as we close, Theo. Since you are a musician, you're the first person that I've asked this question to so far. If there was a piece of music that describe where you are in your life. It could be multiple. It could be multiple. In this particular season, what pieces of music would that be?
Wow. I immediately have 15 that seem to. I'm gonna go with. I think I have. If you ask me to pick one, I have one.
Okay.
But I want to sort of give an honorable. Let me give an honorable mention to a couple. There is somebody who I now consider a mentor and friend. His name is Peter Eldridge. On his debut record, "Fool No More," are several songs that deal with his spiritual journey and asking God questions, and that's okay to do that. That show up for me, that I would if there was one album that, sometimes people have what's your desert island deal? If you could only listen to one record, that would be Peter Eldridge, "Fool No More" would be that record.
Okay. And it's Peter Aldrich, you said?
Eldridge, Peter Eldridge,
okay.
with an E.
Okay.
He is also the bass vocalist for a four-piece vocal jazz ensemble called the New York Voices. I've recently, through being the bassist for Sankofa Sound, had the benefit of really getting deep into some music from Africa that Mulatu Astatke, I believe is how his last name is pronounced, Abdullah Ibrahim, who used to go by Dollar Brand. A song of his called Ishmael has a very ostinato bass line that is almost a sense of like trance being short for transcendental, right? So like getting into a spiritual place when I play that tune, that is really deep and meaningful. There is a couple of songs that I've written that would come up for me. The one is that I made mention of one around like I don't know how to pray anymore. But I think if there was one song that I would love for people to check out, it is we've lost her somewhat recently. Carla Bley, pianist, a tune that she wrote that a dear friend, Ryan Erickson, who happens to be an alum of our university and who studied with the same bass professor at BGSU as I did. Ryan Erickson introduced me to lawns, like as in the green grass that people have. But the composition is called Lawns by Carla Bley. If they made that in a liquid, I would put it in a tub, fill the tub up with that song, and you'd have a hard time getting me out of that tub for a little while.
Now, I would love for you to share with me the links to these songs.
I'd be very happy to
Post them and share them with the folks that are listening, that are going to listen in and tune in. Where can people find you?
Professionally, I'm on LinkedIn. If you put Forde-Stiegler, there aren't too many of us. I think my wife will show up and I will show up if you do that LinkedIn search. That's, the Ford with the extra E after the car. Probably my music is the band Sankofa Sounds that I play with has a YouTube channel. And I have one that is mostly my music and the music of the worship band that I play with on Sunday mornings called Refuge. The fact that they were called that when I found them, they were a refuge in a rough spot in my life. So that was also one of those little nudges where the divine was saying, like, why are you not playing with this band? They're called Refuge. Isn't that what you're looking for? Yeah, those are probably the places and spaces. I welcome folks to contact me on LinkedIn if they want to be in conversation. I would be delighted to do that. Like I said, to me, when two or more of us can be in conversation and we are able to be in a place where that self-monitoring gets turned down, that Charles Lim found improvisational musicians seem to be able to do. That to me is a spiritual experience and one I very much treasure and seek to be a part of.
I am going to say ashe and amen to that. For those of you that are listening in, that are going to be viewing this, I hope that you are being invited even more to turn down your self-monitoring, even for a moment. Thank you all for staying tapped in and tuned in and turned on by KYNDversations. If you found this episode to be supportive for you, please love, like, share, and subscribe. We are building something sacred together, and I look forward to being with you again next Wednesday. Peace and wholeness to you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.